we'll pass over to Dave. So thanks very much, Dave, for making the time.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks to the MDRU for the invitation to speak. And thanks for everyone for coming along today, albeit being much less of a challenge given the weather, which is fantastic, I must say. I do enjoy coming to Vancouver at this time of year to escape the heat, actually in Perth, so the sunny, cool weather is absolutely delightful. The Schrödinger's element, I'm in a scientific department now, so I can talk about Schrödinger's. I could be talking to other audiences and have a clue what I'm talking about. But I think I can get the point across by the end of this talk why I call it that. All right, Sean, now I'm not just the first thing. There we go. And this is just an ad for our Index Technology Day tomorrow, which has the theme, The Rocks Speak, which is a quote taken from Haddon King, a very famous geologist who worked here actually in Canada, also in Australia with CRA Exploration and many other companies as well. That's his monograph, which was published in 1994, 98, something like that. At the time I was working for CRA Exploration, now Rio Tinto. And of course, because he had that background, when it came out, everyone had to read the book. But I do recommend it if you want to read the musings of a geologist over a very, very successful career. It's well worthwhile reading. Now, Schrödinger's cat. So this cat is going to appear multiple times throughout the presentation. And I'm sorry about the cat, but that's quite a woke or politically acceptable way of illustrating whether the cat, I think, is alive or dead without showing it being completely one way or the other. And by the end of the talk, you can decide whether I'm the guy standing next to the river there, shouting, screaming at the sky at people going past, accusing me of being a conspiracy theorist, not working from correct sources, or perhaps wondering where my tinfoil hat is. But I do figure, being at UBC, that I'm within a crowd of people that may be sympathetic to me. Now, just to get your minds working, I always start off with a couple of stupid slides, and I love that one, actually. I think it's fantastic. But in this day and age with Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it in social media, I think I could post that and have people try and comment on it from all sorts of points of view. And I think with some of the information we speak about today, these sorts of things are part of the problems that we need to deal with in the news and in the community. And us as geoscientists are at the front line. So if there's one message I want you to think about when we go through this, is that you are the people at the front line. Older people like myself, it's sort of too late for us to do much about it, apart from enthuse you, younger people, to get into the trenches and fight for the earth, basically. And then just another little thing just to wind you up and show you another graph and to think about causality. Now, I'm not going to enter the debate about what the causation is that shows the pattern on that graph, but again, just to get you thinking before we get into the talk. And one final thing here about data, because we're going to look at a lot of data and randomness, and again, cause and effect. So I do this because lots of people, especially in the old days with oil gas, we used to do a lot of consulting work. Lots of people used to talk to me about data and infer all sorts of things about it, and I'd look at it and go, really? Are you sure? And what that is a random walk. So the bars across the top, the blue and white, are just random pattern of 1 and 0. If it's a 1, I allocate a random number between 1 and 50. If it's a 0, a random number between -1 and -50. And then sum them and make a time series plot. So next time someone tells you that they're a chartist and a financial analyst, and they can look at the stock market and explain what's going on, show them that graph. If all of the patterns that you're looking there are totally and utterly random. Anyway, this is just to get you thinking about what is random, what isn't, and what is cause and what is effect. Just a little bit about Index before I go on. We're a global company. We work in mining technology. I have a background working in the industry. I worked for Pasminco, a company you probably don't even know about anymore in the deep dark past, integrated zinc explorer, miner, and smelter, producer of zinc. And then after that, Anglo-American, actually based here in Vancouver, then started my own company with Stephen Winter and made Iogas, which a lot of you will be familiar with. Sold that to Index, I was going to say 12 years ago, now it's 13, and I'm still there as the chief geoscientist. But we're a global company, we're involved in lots of different things, and the company doesn't mind me spending my spare time doing things like being on the board of the MDAU and giving talks like this. Thank goodness. Now, let's get the Schrödinger's ball rolling. I was actually sitting on the aeroplane on the way here early this week, and there was an article in the Financial Times, quite a short article, and I read it and I went, Jesus, they wrote the abstract for this talk. Now, and I've just abstracted a few comments out of that article. And the Financial Times is a reputable newspaper, you know, it's printed on that nice salmon-coloured paper, etc. Now, have a look at the quotes in here. Have a look at the quotes in here and think about the discourse and the context you get typically on the news when you turn it on now or you look at your phone. So the world was confirmed last week. Yes, it is. Right. Yes, it is. Okay. That's the second one in here. Yeah, damn it. Anyway, all right. So the world was confirmed last week, not 10 weeks ago, breached 1.5 degrees of warming for the first time, which really sets a, it's not agreed with the Paris Accord yet, the way it's exactly measured, whether it's completely breached yet, but we are going to go through it. But in effect, we've already done it. The rate of change is happening faster than what we predicted. And as at the moment, we cannot explain the increased rate of change. No one knows. There's about 3 different explanations the climatologists have come up with. None of them, even if you add them all up, can explain what's going on right now. The Schrödinger's cat thing. China accounts for 30% of carbon emissions, by far the largest emitter on the planet. And yet 60% of all the renewable capacity installed globally between now and 2030 will come from China. So China's mainly the cause, but also the answer to decarbonise the world. So these are things you need to try and get straightforward in your head, when you're trying to make sense of putting tariffs on all these political bun fights that go on. For the West, this presents a great opportunity, maybe, but is it a security threat? Now, just before Christmas, I had a 30 kilowatt hour battery installed, 16 kilowatts of panels and a giant 3-phase inverter. It's all Chinese. Now, I've had people tell me, why did you do that, Dave? The Chinese will override the safety settings on your battery and burn your house down. And I said, wow. I said, well, if it gets to the point where the Chinese Communist Party wants to burn my house down in Perth, the world's got much bigger problems, actually. So I'm not going to worry about that. That one's not going to keep me awake at night. And the China also controls the pricing and the availability of the critical mineral components we need for all of this technology. And despite the noise being made via the Inflation Reduction Act, even our own government, the Canadian government, there is no way that's changing in the next decade. It is just not feasible to change that. And another quote at the bottom there, China's annual investment in clean energy was $890 billion in 2023, not 24 or 15. And they've installed a capacity of 1,200 gigawatts of solar and wind 6 years earlier than what they'd predicted. And their EVs will outsell internal combustion engines this year, 10 years earlier than predicted. And indeed, the rollover of China's carbon emissions starting to reduce is actually predicted to happen sooner than what's forecast at the moment. So, you know, there is a lot going on in the world, and I'll get into more of it as we go on. Why is China the greatest emitter in the world? Strictly power demand, right? And if you, that's, you know, these things appear in the various feeds you have. China really is the master variable in this discussion, and it's on us to really remember that at all times. If you look at the power demand there, so that's nearly 10,000 terawatt hours of power. Like, it's just the numbers are just unimaginable that China will be requiring now, and they haven't finished industrializing yet. You look at a lot of the other countries, the countries that are already developed, so the US, the EU, India's going up a bit, but that will go up faster as time goes on. You know, it's almost rounding errors compared with what's going on in the world. So just bear that in mind. Now, I wouldn't have done this last year because it was 2 years ago I gave this talk. But there's a group run by Ian Bremmer, the Eurasia Group, and every year they give their top risks in the world for the coming 12 months. They forecast the top risks. Now, the year is correct this time. This was the beginning of last year. And I've just highlighted things in red there that were material, at least to the resources industry. So we had the Middle East on the brink, axis of rogues. So that was North Korea, Russia, China, if you want to include China in that, etc. That the Chinese economy wouldn't recover. There'd be a fight for critical minerals and a fight between the BRICS and G7. Now, importantly, when you look at the red herrings, these are things that were commonly thought would come about, but they thought they'd be a red herring and actually wouldn't happen. And that was in case that did not happen. Now, moving forward to this year, they've quite a different set of forecasts and predictions, which are really quite interesting. So Iran on the ropes is interesting from a hydrocarbon outlook, price of oil outlook. So given what's happened with the Israelis and Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and now Syria, there is actually a chance the Middle East may settle right down. But the other risk here is it will put Iran in a very dangerous position. They will literally be on the ropes. One of the forecasts here is that Trump will up the sanctions on Iran, cut their oil supply off even more, and they don't mind a revolution in Iran, as we know. And so that will be a forecast next year. There will be a revolution in Iran. Now, what that will do to global geopolitics and stability, not sure. US-China breakdown, given what I was just talking about, with the reliance on China for decarbonising, for the technology and the materials, let alone the materials we need to build the things to decarbonise. If there's a genuine breakdown between China and the US, that is a big problem for the world on a number of fronts, especially decarb. The rule of Don, right, who knows? So that's just like a random number generator. I'll just go past that. G0 wins. I need to explain that. So what the Eurasia Group is saying here is there's normally been a rule of international law that people pay, they pay attention. So we have the group 10, the group of 20. We have international institutions that apply laws and people pay attention to them. America are the police of the world, whether we like that or not. That's the way it's functioned. They've kept sea lanes open and trade going for decades since the end of World War II. They're predicting that will all end this year. It's also serious stuff. So by G0, what they mean there is just turns into a strong man's world. Rule of force wins. So whoever's the strongest will take what they can, and there'll be no international coalition to slow these things down. Now, that applies not just that applies to everyone, including the US, as you might think. Interestingly, though, on the red herrings, global energy transition stalls. They don't think that will happen. What they think is it will slow down due to some of these other things going on, but it will continue on regardless, but maybe not at the pace we want it to. There's a couple of other things that I've just had at the bottom there. There is another axis, if you like, which is important in the resources world, our world emerging, and that's the Middle East and the Saudis. So they're taking an enormous position in securing resources, mining and technology, putting lots and lots of money into it, and in fact, taking on Russia in Africa, for example. So that's another thing worth watching from a West point of view. Now, just a couple of wind-ups here for the Canadians in the room. There's no lack of stuff you can find to talk about when you talk about these topics. So that headline up there was actually a headline in The Economist last week. Why Canada should join the EU, right? No, I read that and I just had a laugh and I laughed and I laughed. But actually The Economist set out quite a good set of reasons why Canada should. And then I was just speculating on my way here whether if I come back in 2 years and give this talk again, will I need an ETA or will I need an ESTA to get into the country? A Canadian did send me Chrétien's letter to the Globe and Mail. I don't know if you've read it, which was a very good rebuttal of all of the stuff that Trump's been going on. If you haven't read it, I'd recommend you find it and read it. Anyway, odd things. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years. This is just a map of minerals trade routes and the relative value of them. And although I've just been given the Canadians some geopolitical shit, and there's Canada's number 3, there were trade flows with minerals, not hydrocarbons on here, that would add to it, with $33 billion of Canada to the United States. Australia hardly gets out of jail here, just to put it back on us a bit, because we do $100 billion worth of trade with the Chinese. So trying to, if you think about a G0 world and a fragmentation of that political order and its impact on resources and resource flows around the world, it will be real and we will all be part of it. Now, there are a couple of other theories. I'll get off to geopolitics at some point, but there are other couple of things here. So I was also, and this is a conversation that's been going on for a while, that what could possibly happen in a G0 world. Well, one of them would be, well, North America takes South America. It just takes South America, gets all the resources, all the materials that it needs. And by the way, the US will grab Greenland by the sound of it on the way through for its materials. Europe grabs Africa. The Chinese-centric people just grab New Zealand as well. For some reason, Sean, I might leave that off, but the Asia Pacific, well, they need some more sheep, etc., but small wool, but grabs Australia for its resources, including Indonesia and those countries as well. There's plenty of resources there. God knows what happens with Russia, with what's going on at the moment. They're sort of unloved, even largely by the Chinese at the moment. But the other circle there, I'll put the circle with a question mark there, was not so much the Middle East, but more the Arab states, the petro-states. What would the petro-states do? Because they would be unlikely really to align with anyone. And the other wild card in there is India, is also unlikely to really align with anyone. Anyway, just I hope I don't need to show that slide in 5 years and say, I told you so. And, you know, is the cat alive or dead? You know, do you really want to take the box off that one and look at it in 5 years' time? Maybe not. And just on geopolitics, this is a survey that was released. So, you know, Australia has its own problems. Like I said, the amount of trade we do with China. Indonesia is our closest neighbour to the north. It has at least 180 million, it's probably more, that might be more like 240 million strong Muslim population. They used to be pretty Western aligned, actually, but not anymore. Now they would rather align with China. So these alliances are starting to shift and move around. And one thing I say to my American colleagues is, you don't realize what the rest of the world's starting to think of the US, and political alliances are shifting just because a lot of the rest of the world thinks the Americans have turned into a complete basket case. It's being recorded, isn't it? Yeah. Now back to natural resources. So in this world, despite all of this, everything we use in the world, all the resources we use, is inevitably up and to the right. We use more of everything all the time as time goes on. And that, again, is worth thinking about. And a lot of the things I'm showing you here, it's to try and combat the things you see in the news, which can't see further than 1, 3, 6 months into the future. The trend is always, remember that, up and to the right. And the world just constantly needs more and more of everything to keep itself going. And remember how this graph here illustrates how we got to our level of affluence and wealth in the developed world, not necessarily the Western world, but the development world, by burning a shitload of carbon, basically, if you want to put that source of energy which nature provided us hundreds of millions of years ago, and which we dig out of the ground now and burn, has been an absolute game changer for the human race. Allowed us to build technology, live comfortably, multiply, etc. And there is no way we can keep going unless we can change that energy source. So the energy that's got us here will eventually be our demise if we don't do anything about it. Another thing here, just thinking about the world itself, that the world, you know, wealth and living standards are not spread evenly across the globe. There are still a very large number of people in the world that have no access to electricity, clean water, the internet, or sanitation, right? So we have, if you look at the amount of energy that we've used thus far to elevate people like us sitting here to the lifestyle as we know it, there are a lot more people in the world that would aspire to have the same living standards as us. And who are we to tell them that they can't have it? right? Now that we do have it, it's a bit like there's a phrase that people use in business. If you set up a business and build a moat, you climb up the tree and make life good for yourself, then you pull up the ladder, right? No one else can get up there. Is that a world you really want to live in? Need to think about that. Now, just on this building things out and needing materials, this is a slide I actually stole out of Rio Tinto's strategic strategy update late last year. And it's actually a really, really good slide. And it's talking about materials we need. So when we talk a lot about critical minerals, copper, cobalt, zinc, iron, aluminium, things like that, but we don't really talk about the stuff we need just to build things, because we have the world has a lot of building of stuff still to do. And two aspects of that, just building new infrastructure. And then the other requirement of stuff is to harden existing infrastructure against climate change and climate change induced events. There is a big, big demand coming for that. But it's just more stuff we have to move, mine, process, transport, etc. Now, China has largely gone through that phase. So if you look at this graph here, it's a good one, actually. So this is GDP with time. China was here. Now it's up there. So the GDP per capita has actually gone up quite a lot, and it's gone through that massive industrial phase and building phase. The global south is sort of everything south of the equator, but taking out New Zealand and Australia, is not at that level, right? It has a long way to go to get to the same living standard as the Chinese enjoy now, which means that construction, if this is a one, the rest of the world, and I'll go back to everything goes up and to the right, or in Australian, we need lots of shit. The rest of the world needs lots and lots of shit moving forward to get back to that, to get to that same level of building out infrastructure for themselves to make their lives better. Now, this is put together by Rio, and Rio is obviously trying to forecast demands for the things they're mining, so it's a good graph. But the Schrödinger's cat thing pops up again, because iron, steel, cement, and chemicals, all of the things we need to build out all of that infrastructure, produce a third of our carbon emissions. So here we go. Everything we want to happen, need to happen, can't all happen at the same time. It's just not possible. Something needs to give. So the poor old cat puts its bloody, well, I think if you open that box, the cat is dead. But cement, the manufacture of cement is the largest by volume thing we manufacture on the planet. And it literally generates 8%, 10%, 8 to 10% of the world's carbon emissions, just the manufacture of cement. So both the calcining and also just the carbon generation for heating. And that is not easily solved. I mean, if you want to be a super bright scientist and solve something, if you can come up with a building material that's not cement and doesn't generate carbon, you will get a Nobel Prize. I can just absolutely guarantee it. Cement is an interesting material. We still don't completely understand how it works, right? Even though the Romans invented it. So, you know, there's a great research topic there for someone. This is another one of Rio's slides. So you can read this really quickly and just go, oh yeah, whatever. But no, we need to stop and have a look at this. So energy demand, just whatever we're doing, we have the energy we use now, that's a mix of fossil fuels and electricity that come from sustainable sources, etc. Predicted to increase by 3/4 by 2050. Now, given some of the other graphs, I reckon that's actually undercalling it, but let's assume that that's correct. Now, the bigger thing here is the shift in the fuel to provide the electricity. So here we are now, 80% of fossil fuels are used in primary energy is coming 80% fossil fuels. For a net zero requirement in 2050, that needs to be less than 10%. So we need fossil fuels to contribute less than 10% to energy generation, electricity generation, but we need to increase the amount of electricity available by 75%. I think I didn't put the cat on that one. The cat should be on there, really, because you open that box, I don't know what's going on. 70% of electricity should be being generated by renewable means. Global renewable nuclear generates 4.6 gigawatts of energy currently. That needs to increase to 42 gigawatts by 2050. What are our politicians doing? Right? What are they No one really talks about this stuff. I have a thing that I think about with politicians. I have lots of things, actually, that I think about politicians. But one of them is no one, I'm going off piste here, but no one should be elected at the time that they're elected that's over 50 years of age. And I say that because I want the politicians that are elected to live in the shit that they create, to have to live through it, right? I want them to take ownership, to know that they're going to have to live through it. Anyway, that may not be particularly popular. Global power sector investment, 2.7 trillion, that's per annum. That's not in total, that's per annum that's required. And electric vehicles, so this is a classical new technology, goes up, trough of disillusionment because you can't charge a thing up, especially in Australia, or you charge it up and the cable's plugged into a coal-fired power station. All those sorts of problems are true, actually. But they will go away. And then eventually we're going to be producing over 100 million electric vehicles a year. I could talk a lot about Australian politics at this point with our own Liberal Party thing. And we're going to build 7 nuclear power plants, which is sort of quite incredible. Now, I've got nothing against nuclear power, but the fact Australia's never built one, and now all of a sudden we're going to build 7 is sort of weird, I would say. Just sort of weird. And then just some demand growth numbers. So here we come back to mining, just the requirements. So that's 32 million tonnes. Some proportion of that comes from recycling. But by 2050, we need 1.8 times that. It's probably undercalling it again, I think, if we can find it, if we can do it. Aluminium, 1.8 times that. Lithium, 6 times that. The bet that Rio Tinto's put on lithium by buying Arcadium is truly amazing, actually. When they announced that deal, I thought, finally, here's a Western mining company that's taking a punt and looking 20 years ahead. Not many do that. And in the context of Rio doing that, BHP trying to buy Anglo just to shift the deck chairs around on the Titanic while fessing up to the fact they've got to spend $14 billion just to maintain their current copper output, I thought was a very interesting contrast between the two companies. Now, just some other numbers on here, because the numbers are just big. So the mining industry requires 2.1 trillion in new investment by 2050. Just to get the raw materials we need to get the job done. There will be supply deficits. The world will require 3 billion metric tons of metals between 2040 and 50, and 6 billion tons to reach net zero by 2050. These are written by people who don't understand mining, basically. These are theoretical constructs. We might need them, but you try and permit a mine in Australia at the moment. No one wants mines. Right? It's just it's a hellishly difficult process. You'll have seen numbers like the average time between finding something, bringing in production, virtually anywhere, of around 15 to 20 years. And these numbers we're looking at here are in that 15 to 20 year range. So there's the Schrödinger's cat again. It can't all be true at the same time. Something is not going to happen. Oops, put that in the wrong place. Why is he there by himself? Now, I did show this, I might have showed this a couple of years ago, but this is an example of the Balkanization. So the Balkanization, the concentration of supply chains in supply of metals in the world. That there, it's a political map, but it colours in the countries that refuse to sanction or abstain from sanctioning Russia after they invaded the Ukraine, right? That's what that map is coloured in by. Now, so it makes it a geopolitical map par excellence, really. But then if you split up their resources, so after everything we just said about what we need, like everything, to get anywhere near to what we need and require, everything needs to go perfectly. This map is saying that things are not going to go perfectly. So the cat's there again. So if you split up global oil reserves and gas reserves, you know, if we're going to call ourselves US aligned, but who knows now, given our last 12 months, then we're on the skinny side of that. And if you take up some of the metalliferous and ferrous materials and split them up, there's a pretty interesting split between these two geopolitical blocks. The implication being, if we're going to achieve any of this, somehow we need to be able to be getting on with each other to get the job done. And in fact, nickel is already out of date. as you know, with the Indonesians, because they now produce just themselves almost 60% of the world's nickel that's required. And since I made that, I think uranium's not even on that list. But talking about geosupply risk, this is in Niger, the French company with 2 uranium mines there. The Niger government has taken control of them and handed them to the Russians. So these aren't theoretical things that are going on. These are real, let alone what's going on with Mali, with Barrack and all those sorts of things. But that's different to this. Let's talk about hydrocarbons, because we still need them for a while. We can't just wean ourselves off them just like that. But they do also feed into the geopolitical discussion. So the US, unbelievably, produces about 15 million barrels of oil a day now. It went from an oil importer 7-8 years ago. Now it's completely self-sufficient and actually is exporting about 5 million barrels of oil a day, which is really quite incredible, which from a political point of view means they've lost a lot of interest in the Middle East. Really, apart from Israel, the rest of it they really couldn't give a shit about much anymore because they're self-sufficient themselves. And that will play out more and more in the next year or two. You'll see the effect of that. But it's still a problem for the rest of the world, right? What's going on? So that's the Strait of Hormuz there in the Middle East. So 30% of crude and 20% of all LNG goes through that 20-mile gap, which the Houthis have been having pot shots at ships that go through. So I went back to the start, the global police, who's going to keep these sea lanes open? If these sea lanes really do get closed and no one can be asked going in there to keep them open, to keep some global political order in place, it is a problem for the world. So these are they're geographic things, but they're also geopolitical things. So hydrocarbons are important, but they've had an effect. I used to have to search for stuff like this to talk about. I don't anymore. It's in every second thing you pick up and read. The 2 graphs on the right, sorry, the graph on the right here, it was literally published in The Economist, I think, even early this week, late last week. But it's just talking about global mean sea surface temperatures for the last few years. And that's an interesting graph there, the way they've done it, because on the x-axis, say, the global mean surface sea temperature oscillates with El Nino. But if you look at the degree of departure from a normal up and down oscillation of El Nino, what's going on in the El Nino of 23 and 24 far surpasses any one of those other previous high temperature points. No one really knows what the hell that means. This is part of the hottest year on record. What does it mean going to the future? It's actually broken most of the climate models. I read one quote that said that, well, it was in the 95th percentile of our predictions. So I read that one. That was exactly what a scientist would say. But I go, well, is that good or bad? I don't think it's good, right, to be at the 95th percentile of predictions. Knowing that, especially in climate science, because as soon as climate science puts its head up, it gets shot off these days. It's typically pretty conservative in its statements. So I often tell people, you're having barbecue arguments with people, I say, you know what you're reading about these predictions is actually conservative. People are being very conservative because if they really told you what you thought, they'd scare your pants off and you would just disbelieve it entirely. So just remember that one. And here's another graph. This one's even sort of more alarming, if you like. Annual deviation from global sea surface temperature trend, taking El Nino years into event again. And that trend line there is just too perfect for my liking. Actually, way, way too perfect for my liking. You see things like, but as a discipline, if you took all of the, now I'm going off piste again here, but as a discipline, if you took geoscientists, if you took a straw poll around the world, you'd find more geoscientists than any other scientific discipline, I think, have a problem with climate change. It's because they do know that climate changes, and that's part of the problem. What they don't take into account is rates of climate change. That's the problem. And here's just some other quotes here, just things for you to use around barbecues. I like to give people just quotes and tidbits I can tell people when if you really hate them, I want to depress them a lot. The Earth is currently experiencing the hottest temperatures it has in the last 120,000 years. So, people telling you, well, the Earth used to be hotter. Yeah, but not like this, not for 120,000 years. The speed of warming is also exceptional. 10 times faster than any rate that's ever occurred in history, which I think is an important quote. Then another interesting thing here is when we're talking about average sea temperatures rising, it means land temperatures increase by double that. Right? Now, if you live in Perth, you go, bloody hell, come on, that's too much. But in fact, if you live near the tropics and the land temperature goes up and humidity is going up, then you've got a real problem because you actually, with humidity or the wet bulb temperatures, you're actually rendering large parts of the planet actually uninhabitable, right? Or needing shitloads of air conditioning, so you need more energy. Right? So again, the poor old Schrödinger's cat gets put to use again. Now, just to, with some of these discussions, who are the best people to talk to? The insurers, actually, because they keep tabs on these things very closely and they measure them very precisely. So I made that graph before the fires. That graph was made, I should say, I've got before the fire down in LA. But that's just a count of inflation-adjusted numbers of disasters in the US, which have cost more than $1 billion. And I look at that trend and I look at the other trend I was showing you. And again, I don't think I was talking about random walks before. I don't think these things are random walks. I don't like the nice correlation between these two data sets very much at all. And this was also pre the fires in LA. And this was just areas of the US where people are dropping their insurance of various types because it's become too expensive for many reasons, because it's the US, it's complex, but mainly because of the increased risk or frequency of major events that the insurance companies are paying out on for damage. So if you want to know what's going on in the world, you basically go and talk to the insurance companies or the reinsurance companies. They'll tell you exactly what's going on. And like I said, that was all before the disastrous fires that are now occurring in LA. And I can tell you that in Australia, we're watching this story very, very closely because we expect something relatively similar to happen. But look, rather than depressing you throughout this whole entire talk, I'll put the odd bit of good news in here. And look at that. There's the share of coal in power generation in many countries going down. Deliberately, they've not put China on there, although China is building a lot of renewable capacity. They're also building a lot of coal-fired power plants. So I think the cat is probably still dead. Now, other things, subtle things that are small but have major leverage and major impacts. Sea level rise. So yes, the sea level's been rising, but the worrying thing here is that the rate of increase of sea level rise has changed in the last 10 years. Just a little bit, but man, it's enough. So what does that mean? That means that, and this is a true Schrödinger's cat thing here. So in the US, down at Galveston in Texas there, they've realized, the US Army Corps of Engineers, that during, because of ice melting, sea level is rising, and they need to do something about it. Ironically, to protect the giant petrochemical industry. Wherever you go, like you can't get something for nothing, right? So they need to build this dike to protect against increasing sea level. And then when you have a hurricane come through and starting from an increased sea level place, flooding the shit out of Galveston, destroying the petrochemical industry. So we can't have that. So they are saying that they're going to extend and build this dike, and they're planning for it to cost $57 billion US dollars to do that, what I call climate, infrastructure reinforcing work. So this sort of work will start to increase more and more around the world. But of course, it will take lots of cement. And remember, cement generates 10% of the world's carbon emissions. So honestly, in this world, you never get something for nothing. And then I just added another comment there on sand. So infrastructure, materials. So we're getting to the point now where we are actually selling sand to the Arabs. I know it's a joke, but it's true, because you need a specific sort of sand, especially if you want to make glass, not just to add to cement. So sand is now becoming critical, and there are now sand wars starting around Malaysia and Asia. People trying to grab special high purity sand for making glass and things like that. So anyway, it's just worth thinking about how these things knock on. You would have read around data centers. So AI is going to save us from everything. Apparently, it'll work out all of these horrendously complex problems. But data centers themselves suck a whole lot of power. So something for nothing. You can't have something for nothing. So that graph there, and I don't know how old it is, Q1 2024. So this is about this time last year. All data centers in the world were up to 350 terawatt hours of power consumption, increasing very rapidly. And there's a whole bunch of countries there which these data centers require more power than entire countries. And then if you factor that in, including what the Chinese require, then it's just everything is up and to the right. But just a little bit about solar and what's going on with it. So second to China with new installed solar capacity is the Middle East. Actually, Saudi has installed second to the Chinese. But these are, this is actually from the UAE, and these are some solar farms that have gone in there. So that's 1.3 gigawatts, 3.3 million panels gone in there. Here's another one that's a 2 gigawatt farm. They installed that, the frames were built, but they installed that in 200 days. So it's amazing what you can do. Maybe you've got cheap labor, forced labor almost, but if you put your mind to it. And here's another solar facility, which is a mixture of different types of things. So concentrating solar, parabolic, etc. That'll be a 5 gigawatt facility in the UAE, not Saudi. Saudi's building similar things by 2030. But there's a few things going on here in the Arabian Shield. They have space. We already argue in Australia about putting solar farms out, how much space it's taking, how much farmland it's using. That argument goes on the US as well. The bit that often gets forgotten are power lines to connect it all. This is a big problem, actually, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But these things, solar panels don't last forever, and there's a defect rate when you manufacture them. Already, the Arabian Shield is covered with solar panels you can't do anything with. Now, in full disclosure here, I'm an investor in a small company that's looking at recycling solar panels. Now, I would say the same things with lithium batteries in cars. What the hell are we going to start doing in 5 or 10 years when we're flooded with lithium batteries out of cars? We don't yet have an effective way of recycling them efficiently, and you certainly can't go and throw them in landfill. But solar panel recycling, this little company was looking at extracting there's silver, there's tin, there's a bit of zinc, there's some copper. But you know what the value is going back to the sand? The glass. That's the value. The value actually is in the glass. India is desperately short of glass and material to make glass. And if you go back further again, remember the Indians are on the cusp of this giant spend to build up all of their infrastructure, build buildings, etc., all of which need glass. So the value for recycling those turns out to be in the glass, not the metals that are there. It's sort of an interesting outcome, unexpected. But so far, even with those giant solar farms, none of them have storage. Right? This is a problem. And it's not as though on the Arabian Shield, you can put in pumped hydro, for example. That's not going to work there. So they're looking at batteries now. So they're looking at LFP batteries, but batteries for really giant scale grid storage like that really only sort of work. But there are new battery chemistries people are looking at. So flow batteries are an interesting thing. We're working on them in Australia as well. Sodium batteries. So, battery technologies will evolve. Our aspiring Liberal government, which for us is the right-wing government, wants to get in power, wants us to keep driving our internal combustion engines so we don't pull too much power off the grid while we wait for nuclear power plants to be built. And people tell me this in all honesty at barbecues, and I say, in 10 years, you won't be able to buy an internal combustion engine. Where's that? Where's that going? And by then, the battery running your car probably lasts 5,000 kilometers and cost a third as much. So, eventually a lot of technology here will come to the rescue. But in the meantime, we have gone and built renewable sources of energy, especially wind farms and solar farms out in the desert. But just a couple of quotes here. This is another thing published last week. UK consumers will face a 2.25 billion bill this year to pay wind farm operators to stop because they cannot connect the power generated by them into the grid. These are all of our governments at work, right? These are none of these things are surprises to engineers when you talk to them, but apparently surprises the shit out of the politicians. China's use of gas and coal went up last fall because much of the electricity wasn't fed into the grid. So generating by that, they just can't get it into the grid. and you can read of that, the rest of that. So we have this problem in Australia as well. We are turning off large-scale solar farms because we can't get them into the grid. We can't build the interconnectors, the power infrastructure. No one wants high-tension power lines built across their farms anymore. But look, just so the cat is not completely dead all the time, is a bit of a positive thing. So reconductoring is an interesting technology. So if you can take the existing power infrastructure and reconductor it, there are new materials, new alloys you can use with aluminium where you can use the existing towers, but the power cables themselves can take 4 times the amount of energy power that the existing power lines can. So that's a really easy win, and it's actually very, very cheap to implement. And they can get really clever now. They run fiber optics down, all of these things now. They know exactly how much of what the tension is, what the temperature is, what the sag is. Often you've got to back off sending power down these high tension lines because they get too hot. And they get hot, they're sagged, and you don't want them hitting together. So they can control all of those things very precisely because they know the temperature all the way along the power line. So, you know, high technology comes to the rescue. Oh, and I've lost a picture in there. There's meant to be a picture in there. And anyway, the picture there just is a little thing showing that in Western Africa, most people don't have access to power, but they do now. Little bits of power, but solar power, they're using solar panels very, very in very novel ways to deliver powers to themselves. So a lot of I had a solar system on the house in Australia when they put it on last week. The panels that came off, I said, what do you do with that? He said, we're sending them to Africa. We're donating them to Africa, and they're getting used in West Africa, and people are setting up little micro solar plants for as little as $20. And in a place like that, that is unbelievably meaningful. And there's another graph disappeared off there, but here's another thing, that's another positive thing, that the relative investment going into renewable energy rather than oil and gas is exceeding what's going into hydrocarbons, and it's now double that as we go out. So things are happening, but are they happening fast enough would be my statement here. A little bit more into resources. So you've probably heard the story of nickel, and Australia's shut down a lot of its nickel mines and nickel smelters. There are multiple reasons for that. The nickel mines that we did have were on the top quartile on the cost curve, and the smelters and refineries were ancient. No one spent any money on them for 50 years. Anyway, let's ignore that. They are uncompetitive. So, you know, the Indos banned the export of unprocessed nickel in 2012, 14. And then the Chinese said, oh, this is interesting, went and did a deal and parked a whole lot of technology in Indonesia that allowed them to take really shitty nickel deposits and turn them into really quite high-grade nickel using an RT kiln type process. Now, the Schrödinger's cat comes into this as well. Indonesia's power consumption went up by about 1/3, and they think about that was mainly due to these new nickel industrial processes. But nevertheless, the Indonesians now control the global nickel market, and they themselves are now talking about curtailing mining and mining by 30%, just to take nickel back off the market again to try and drive the price back up. So what goes around comes around would be some of that. But the Schrödinger's cat thing here, so if you wanted your EV and at the time it had a nickel chemistry battery in it, would you pay more for an EV that had nickel that came from a nice clean environment, or you take the cheaper car because the nickel is produced in one of these industrial parks in Indonesia? That's let alone showing the mining areas where they're strip mining, the rainforest, and all of the sludge and everything's being directed straight into the ocean around the archipelago. Anyway, again, you don't get something for nothing. On to copper. So we're getting sort of closer to home now. Copper's really interesting. So I remember talking to our own board 4 or 5 years ago, and they're going, what is all this critical mineral stuff, Dave? I said, look, most of that stuff are thin markets. We've never looked for it. If we do, we'll find it. There'll be a boom. Then we'll oversupply it. So don't worry about that. But copper is different, right? We've used it industrially almost forever as soon as we worked out a use for it. The demand for copper has a CAGR, compound annual growth rate, of about 3.3%. It's been incredibly consistent since 1900, and it sort of doubles every 25 years. And so if you look at what we're using now, call it 25 million tonnes in 25 years, call it 2050, we'd be at about 50 million tonnes. So it's not wildly off what people are forecasting without energy transition. This is just increase in copper just to industrial applications, what we've used it for forever. So it's not accounting for all of the other uses of copper that we have. So interesting. And here are some of these forecasts. I think I get a bit pessimistic on the lack of supply side, but people looking at shortfalls of copper that we require to supply into that market to get any of this work done. And then we combine that with the discovery rate, which you're well familiar of large copper deposits. That doesn't mean, so even a lot of people at work, our finance types, grab on to the copper discovery thing. Yes, it's a true story, but people forget that around existing operations, you can add resources, right? So if you go drilling like mad around some of your existing operations, you can do something about this nickel shortfall, but it's not going to make up for what's going on that graph on the side there. Now, I won't go into some of those details. I'll show you another picture instead. So why isn't the world going, I'd say, putting serious money into copper exploration? And I wondered about that for a long time. Now, and I think this gives you the answers. So I need to explain this a bit. The green, this is copper supply coming from mining, the light green bar graph, and you see it increasing up and to the right to meet a lot of the graphs we looked at previously. The blue line is just the copper price. The interesting line here is the copper price in constant $1998. The year doesn't matter, but this is the copper price in constant currency, taking into account CPI. Despite everything I've said about copper, the price has gone nowhere, right? Where's the incentive for the industry to go out and go gangbusters to deliver all of this copper we need? This is truly a Schrödinger's cat exercise. This cat is dead. The copper cat is absolutely dead as a doornail. And I'll go back to the comment before that BHP would rather buy Anglo's mines than really get serious about doing more copper exploration. I'm picking on BHP and Anglo, but I shouldn't. But you know, what the hell is going on here? So this is this went back to 1955. The price is the same, right? In equivalent dollars. What we have done with technology is managed to possibly cut our own throats by increasing the supply with a constant price, by making everything bigger. Big open cut mines got discovered. They're made really big, really deep, big trucks moving in tents, enormous amounts of materials, crushing and grinding enormous amounts of rock at enormous cost, but doing it at such scale they could still make money even though the copper price wasn't moving around very much. Now, that we're going to talk about technology tomorrow at our technology day. That's over, right? That's over now. So we need this. Something needs to change in this paradigm to drive the availability of copper in the world. I don't know what it is. Some of you guys have some ideas, and I know that the BHPs and the Anglos of the world are looking at sulfide leaching and technology like that, but whether it can deliver the sheer amount of copper that we need, I just don't know. And this graph here, this is Wombold, Anglo's CEO. He made a point at some point last year that using current dollar prices, that if copper's sustainably above $15,000 US a ton, then we'll think about it. And I thought, geez, what a dickhead when I heard that. And then I started looking at this and went, oh no, he's right. There is no incentive in the price to really go gangbusters looking for copper right now. Now, I could show, and the other thing to note from that graph, although the price has moved around even in constant currency terms, there's very little, there's no direct relationship between copper supply changing and the copper price. There's a lag, like there's a huge delay involved. So even if it went to $30,000 a ton, some mine designs would change. They'd all become horrible mines because we've been mining even more shit, using more power to get the copper out. But we wouldn't exactly bring a whole lot of new copper to market within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So that's also worth thinking about. To the analysts and economists, think there's a copper tap and a lithium tap and all these taps. Just go and get it. Well, they don't exist. We all know they don't exist, but not enough people in the world don't know that they don't exist. Right? There's just a hypothetical discussion, but it's not. The other thing here, these are levels of capital investment by the mining companies and mines, and that's not a pretty picture either. And the other thing which I've written in there is the capital intensity. So apart from all these other problems, the capital intensity to bring a ton of copper onto the market has shot through $20,000 a ton. In fact, it's probably closer to 25 or 30,000 US dollars a ton now. So the copper price hasn't moved. It's getting harder to bring mines into production. And the capital intensity to build a mine to bring the copper into production shot through the roof. That is not a good economic soup to take to the board of a big company and say, let's get really moving with copper. So something will have to change there, or the cat will have our guts for garters. Some other things, just some other things there, just some challenges for the industry getting a bit more geological now. So you will have all seen some version of this, just resource reserve classification. But just a different way of thinking about this, and all the different mining codes think about these in different ways. But even when we find something, if we do find something and we get to an inferred resource, so that's past exploration to think we really have something, then we want to get it down from inferred, we want to get it to indicated, move it over to probable and proven. And when we get it to proven, that we mine it. The losses we incur in that process. So if we started with 100 tons of something or 100 ounces of gold or something like that, we start with 100. By the time we mine something, and this is positive, this is optimistically, we're left with about a third of it, which is actually mineable. Maybe. A lot of times it's much less than a third. And so that's a problem. The other problem here is the current technology we have to do exploration, definition, resource estimation, and get it to that point. To move through this takes years and years and years before we even know what that number is or what that number is. That is a big problem. And environmentally, in the world, this axis here, which is, I mean, this is geologically, it's all fine, this is what's there, but this is what we can actually mine, which means that we need to take into account political things, water supplies, where you're going to put a tailings dam, all important things. This axis is getting harder and harder. So this axis is hard enough, moving across that axis just gets more and more difficult. So it takes longer and longer to get down to that box. And that's the box we've got to get to if we're going to mine this stuff. So I think there's plenty. I mean, we're going to be talking about technology tomorrow, but I'm just going to give the opening talk. I'm going to say, I think there's plenty of things we can think about on this graph, if we think about a different way, to speed things up and reduce risk and make decisions faster, just to move through the process. As you know, it gets gamed a lot on the stock market, so that's another thing. And I think, and I'm not going to go into this because we have a workshop, Sean, on Wednesday next week, which I think has been advertised. So partly the problems in navigating around in there is not a good understanding of the value of information that you can collect at each one of these phases to de-risk the process early enough to move a category or to move along more quickly, because we don't collect it in the first place, or we get to indicated and you give it to an SRK wherever, and they go, no, sorry, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. You don't understand the structure. We're not confident enough of the geometry. In fact, you go drill again. 2 years at it. Just do it right the first time. You take 2 years off that process. So a lot of that will come down to things like the value of information, properly understanding it in that context. I don't want to go into that one now. I've not said anything about gold particularly, but it's not out of the woods either, because it has its own problems in adding supply. You might argue, given some of the geopolitical complexities, I mean, talking about that gold and Bitcoin are probably all you're going to worry about for the next 10 years, and just forget about the rest. It's quite possible that that's an outcome. Not that I would ever recommend anyone buying Bitcoin, but it's sort of instructing that 1 ounce gold coins have been sold out at Walmart in the US. So you think about that. So people are getting quite worried about some of these issues now. Just a last couple of words here. I need to tell it how I think it is, but I don't want catastrophism to dominate the conversation, right? I think people like these audiences should think deeply about this thing and know about it and argue about it. But when you go out of the room and you're talking to non-domain specialists, then you need to have some sort of an optimistic story, like we can do something about this, because if people think it's all too much and we can't do anything about it, we're doomed, basically, then they won't do anything. It's just human nature. So you need to go out and say, look, we can do something about this. Get out of the way, do this, do that. Talk to young people. Encourage young people to do clever things at universities. And, oh, that had a graph there. It's also gone. And I just had a couple of graphs about things that are actually happening, but not fast enough. So carbon capture is actually, increasing. Carbon emissions are actually falling in many countries. I'll get to that. There's one number, and this would be a good project actually for a university, probably maybe the EOS department here to look at. There's one number I've not seen put up, and that is all of the work with everything the world has done now to mitigate carbon emissions. What would that add up to? Because it would be a big number if you look at in the last 20 years. So if you came out with that number and then went to the general public and said, this is the carbon we've mitigated going into the atmosphere without trying particularly hard in the last 20 years. Now let's look at forward 20 years. We can increase that by an order of magnitude and we'll get there. Really simple messages like that. I would love to hear that message from somewhere. And I'm just going to finish up with that movie, that horrible movie. Most of you must have seen that. I think the world is getting a little bit like that, but I don't want this movie to end up quite like that movie. Please. There you go. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I know we're running sort of like before Dave's happy to entertain questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Far away, Dave. I'm very happy to take them.
Gone.
Thanks for But let's get to the story.
Yeah, no.
About 10 years ago, I come to Chile, and a guy called Will Steffenberg. So Will was he was American, but spent most of his career at AU, system scientist, one of the founders of the Anthropocene and founders of the Anthropocene. Amazing guy. He gets talking, had graph after graph, exponential disaster after exponential disaster. And the incredible, it's really kicking off in the 1970s, and we liberally attribute that to Reagan and Thatcher, but that's politics. But yeah, just every number was exponential. And he did it in good humor, slightly entertaining, it was quite humorous, and it was a disaster. So I went up to the end and I said, how do you do this? How do you smile and put something fun and tell such a horrible story? And he said, well, I'm a system scientist, and so my view is that we will achieve, to your point at the end of it, a better order, a higher order at some point. But to get to that higher order in a system that's moving out of equilibrium very fast, we have to get to a state of complete chaos in order to do that. I said, well, that's really optimistic. So where are we right now? Chaos. Everything you talk about, in a way, is predicting an impossible scenario on impossible scenarios. So are we in a pretty approach chaos? What will chaos look like? And then if we go through chaos, do we actually move to higher order of equilibrium again and adjust? Then you can respond there.
No, well, it's a good question, because I think I have two ways of answering that. And in French, the Earth doesn't give a fuck. It doesn't have a problem. We do. Right? The Earth is completely fine, and it will just find a new equilibrium, but it may be without us, right? Or a vastly reduced number of us. Now, I don't like talking about that. I also don't like talking much about tipping points and equilibriums, and like people. But if you talk to the general public, they literally think we'll fix this and glaciers will reappear. Well, no, they won't. Once they're gone, right? They might reappear in a few million years. Yeah, right. And so what do you do? So I think, and if you look deeper and deeper into it, if we really, we've probably got to, God, this sounds catastrophic again, we've probably got 5 years to really make a dent in starting to reduce and then start bringing down the carbon emissions, or getting the carbon out of the atmosphere, might be another way of putting it. And then things won't reset at a level which is very, very unpleasant. I think the level of unpleasantness that's possible in the next few years is pretty horrendous. And the humidity, right? Even in Australia, bloody Perth is getting humid, right? Which is weird, right? And you go and talk to the farmers, they know what's going on. And I was serious, and even Twiggy goes on about this, the humidity crisis. And it's true, right? Because all of the oceans around Australia are all hotter. So it's just more humid everywhere. So it means predicting the weather becomes harder because the models haven't had to measure it before. But if we get to the point where things just shift to different equilibriums and start doing things that way, then to shift them back, I don't know, you probably got to take so much carbon out of the atmosphere and overshoot the other way to shift the equilibrium back again. But nature, once it finds an equilibrium, likes to sit there, it'll fight. It's just the scientists in me saying once it reaches an equilibrium, we might not like it, but it will fight to stay there once it reaches it. It'll set up its own buffers.
Mindset of change happening right now. So it's still be trendology, even though we know that the trends are going to change. So the observations are wrong. When it comes to something specific like copper actually, it's a balanced market. It's always been balanced. It goes in and out. Get very excited when it's out. That's why it's gone up to 3.2. We will never have the massive deficits. It's impossible because we'll adjust our consumption to always be more or less in maintenance. And what that can do, though, with biotechnology, that's the only way we can do what we're saying to do. We can't just add competence. We have to change what we do. And that's, to me, that's like grid efficiency. I mean, numbers people talk about on grid efficiency is 30%.
Yeah. 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 I've often thought if every household had a power meter in the kitchen and a dollar meter next to it in the world, then power usage would go down by a third globally. Yeah. Yes. Cut straight to the chase. Yeah. Yeah. I'll see you this evening. Yeah. Yeah. I hope I haven't depressed you too much. But you do need to think these things through. Right? And more people that are thinking about it, the better, actually. And I don't hold out much hope of our politicians. Like I said, I'd prefer all the politicians were younger than 50. Something might happen. I think 50. Well, I used to say that, and I think 50. They'll be in it up to their necks, even if they're 50 now.
I think that a part of that issue is not just age, but also often scientists don't go into politics, for example.
Oh, well, just scientists in general, I suppose. It's not our natural leaning. Well, you've got a whole media environment which is distrustful of all science now. So vaccines, climate science, you name it, there's always someone to say it's all bullshit. So in that environment, it's very hard to have a rational discussion. What people do pay attention to is why is LA burning to the ground in the middle of winter? Right? Now that gets people's attention. But even then, I've got to say the hurricanes in the US earlier this year were created by the government, weren't they? That was one of the things going around at some point, all controlled by Kamala Harris. And just go, how can you possibly cut through? Maybe if you unplug Twitter, would be a good start, actually. It uses energy. I can't see AI solving all of this stuff entirely either, but maybe from a material science point of view, we can come up with different sorts of alloys, a different version of aluminium, which is a much better substitute for copper. That there are things that could happen relatively quickly. But aluminium itself is interesting because it's becoming used more and more now, again, just with infrastructure, building things. But, just wait for a big dam to overflow and fail or things like that. And then the people will get angry and want change, but they won't understand it'll take 20, 30, 40 years to sort of get it back.
So David, as geoscience, I see the big problem is when I look at my son's 13, so he's 13 and going on 14 in high school. So they get obviously a lot of science education, but they typically don't get sort of big picture education. If they get geoscience education, they sort of have the mountain or like
Yeah.
find 1970 stuff, but they don't maybe not quite this doom and gloom level of education, but they're not getting effectively resource education at a young age.
Yeah, also, so I'm an economic geologist. So I think economic geology embraces the world that you operate in. So I think geopolitics and politics and economics and geology and economic geology should be much more of the same thing, because we're the best place to be the correct influences in that discussion, I think. But we don't. And for many reasons, geologists are often a bit reticent to actually get involved in those discussions because they can get pretty hairy pretty quickly. Yeah. Maybe if I was younger in the industry, maybe I wouldn't. But it's interesting. If I was 35, would I get up and give this talk in public? I don't, probably, just because I'm me. But actually being a bit older now means I don't care if I'm upsetting people when I give these talks. Whereas younger people, this might be, I mean, and I don't need to go to a big resource company and get them to read my PowerPoint before I go and give it in public, right? So, and I think that's another thing. Index, if they did know what I was talking about today in detail, might be going, take Index off that PowerPoint, please. but certainly, if I work for a Rio, BHP, Tech, whatever you want to call it, there's no way known you get that through the corporate people, and that's a problem.
I think our second year environmental science class do posters every year, right? So you get, air quality in the valley, climate change, drying, every doom and gloom story coming out. But we see nothing in that class around effectively resources, energy, minerals.
Yeah.
None of that stuff. I can only assume that's being covered by the teachers that are teaching that class. They get the doom and gloom stuff about how bad everything is, but nothing sort of around what the solution pathways and challenges around that.
Yeah.
Actually have responsibility.
I want one of the unis to calculate what we've mitigated in the last 20 years of what we've done, because that's going to be a big number, actually.
And to your point, there are, I know good news stories typically don't make much in the media if they do that 3 seconds on slow news day. But
Yeah.
That's good news story stuff.
Yeah, but we've not done nothing. We've done a lot more than nothing. And I think if we can articulate that, then that gives the way forward to do more on top of that. Yeah. Of action, yes. Wouldn't that be great? I just have no idea how you calculate it. You've got a giant EOS department here. There's surely someone who is into this stuff.
People learn through training, right? So I'm from New Zealand, and in New Zealand we have a very deregulated power market. So quite interesting company. You could live on the wholesale rate, which is normally great, right? You're paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour. It's a fifth the price of everyone else. All of a sudden, people are paying $2 a kilowatt hour when it doesn't rain for 3 months. And everyone's in mass panic and trying to join the other companies. The other companies are saying sod off when they're losing money selling to the regular customers. So all of a sudden, it's in the media. Everyone's talking about electricity, and then it rains, and
then it goes again. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Jackson.
Yeah.
How do you address being able to react to scenarios like you talk about, them putting in flood barriers in Houston, but historically, like the global south, where a lot of wealth is transferred out of the countries, they don't have much to prevent sort of react, especially where current resource extraction is still taking place, and potentially if you get into an area with sustained rainfall temperature where you just can't operate a mine there anymore, how do you react to that?
Yeah, no, that's a moral problem as well as an economic one, I think. And I think that in a way, with the Paris Agreement, tries to address that by putting a greater onus on the developed countries to cut more than the developing countries. And I think that's fine and a way to do it because they can afford it per se. But when you look at that big picture, because all of those countries want to develop, right? They want the same standard of living. So for them to get up there, they're going to, Schrödinger's, right? Can't all happen at the same time. So they'd have to go about it via different means and using new technology and power developed from other sources and things like that. And actually, the Western world has done a good job largely of containing its carbon emissions, or at least not going up. They should be pushing them down, but that's certainly happening. Again, apart from China, but China's developing, but they'll go over the top. They'll go over that thing sooner than they're saying. But yeah, that's not much help to the global South, if you like, which all have these aspirations. And the global South, a lot of people live in climates which are just going to become intolerable. I think, if you talk the UN, they're already talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of people moving now just due to climate impact, and that will increase. Given the timescales and everything involved, I just don't see a way out of that. So we worry about Florida, perhaps becoming actually uninhabitable in the next 10 years. And that's a wealthy place, obviously. People still want to get out of there, let alone if you've got none of that infrastructure. Bangladesh and Australia, we have the Pacific Islands talking to us all the time, going, you've got to limit your climate. Well, we say, well, man, we could emit no carbon, actually, but it's not going to save your atoll in the middle of the Pacific now. But these are things which are all just will happen in the next 10 years. It's very difficult. So people don't want to relocate either, typically. That's all it's been. I actually can't give you a good answer to that. It's going to be an existential crisis for many people.
All right, we might wrap up there, Dave, but thanks very much. That was fascinating. And we'll look forward to seeing it round up, and hopefully everyone will be down there next week to catch the various talks, etc. going on. So thanks very much, Dave. I appreciate you coming by.
I know.